Ladies and gentlemen, could we please have a seat? Everybody, thank you so much for coming. I'd like to start by addressing the people of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the original custodians of the land that we own today, the people who are past, present, and emerging. I'd like to start off today with an audience participation exercise. I'd love for all of you to turn to the person next to you and look them right in the eyes. Just look right at them. Now I want you all...
Yeah, that doesn't make it at all. No.
Now I want you all to hold hands with that person. Hold that person by the hand.
Do you want to hold hands?
Yeah, let's hold hands.
I'm really can't.
Me too.
I can't.
Amazing. And now I want you to say to them, I want you to look that person in the eye while holding their hand tight. You are enough.
You are enough. You are enough.
Thank you.
Now, I said 3 words. I don't know what the rest of this is. But. Now, just marinate in that feeling. That feeling that you're experiencing right now is social anxiety. Because that was very awkward, and I respect everyone for doing it. And everyone who didn't do it, I respect your commitment to your boundaries. Everyone who did do it, thank you for trusting me. You don't know me, but I really do appreciate that. And anyone who didn't have anyone to look at, you're not alone. I saw you. I'm with you. We have an amazing panel today of experts in the topic of mental health and creativity. And I'd love to just go and introduce all of them with a bit more depth, and then we will go into a conversation about mental health for creatives who are working in a studio environment, startup, and freelance environments. And then we'll be taking questions in the last 10 minutes, so feel free to use the Slido app and ask your questions live. So our first panelist to my right is Daniel, as you heard, and apologies for fubbing with my phone. I'll cover it with the notebook to make it look a bit more palatable. But Daniel is a clinical psychologist and the founder and director of Optimise Psychology, Melbourne. He has a master's qualification in clinical psychology and postgraduate business management qualifications and extensive experience in both fields. His aim is to provide people and organisations in Melbourne to overcome problems and achieve. He is a wonderful man, and a psychologist that I've personally had sessions with, and I can attest to his services. Wonderful. Next is Kat. Kat is a Melbourne-based designer, illustrator, and who believes in using their skills, experiences, and privilege as tools for social change. Their childhood featured a collection of traumatic events, relationships, and situations, but the silver lining of enduring these things is the development of deep empathy, which underpins all of their personal values and flows through all of their work. Kat highlights their circumstance as visibility to others out there who have experienced trauma, particularly fellow survivors of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And Steph, and we can applaud that as well if we want to. And then Steph, who is a brilliant content strategist, copywriter, and illustrator who makes complex things easy for human beings to understand. She's also the co-founder of Friday Best, a series of online interviews with young women, and a regular contributor at Dumbo Feather magazine. Before moving to Amsterdam in 2013, she ran media campaigns for award-winning Australian publisher and text publishing, and helped found Melbourne chapter of a global lecture series, Creative Mornings, which is a brilliant series of events to attend. And then, as for myself, my name is Mete. I'm the creative director of Either. Either's fine. Either is good, to be honest. We specialize in film, animation, illustration, but we're all here after the talk, so feel free to come up and say hi. So with that, I'd love to sort of dive into the background of what this whole conversation is going to be about. And a lot of Daniel's theory comes from what's known as the School of Life, and how we judge our own personal self-worth based on our creative output. And I would love to have you sort of talk more to that and give us more detail on what exactly that means.
Thanks, Mete. So when we're talking about mental health and we start from the base, we're talking about humans and the human system. The School of Life is something, I suppose, it's parallel. It's an organisation. They have videos on YouTube. It's parallel to the way I work, and the way I work is very much scientifically, neurologically minded, but the School of Life there's some great videos there. And one in particular relates to how humans develop and grow, and so the human system. We start, and in mental health, we can think about a workplace sort of down or a society down, but very often it's powerful to think about the individual out. And a key aspect of that is the common experience of all individuals, that we're all born, we all have a genetic inheritance that we're born with, which is, has a certain amount of opportunities and vulnerabilities within that. And then the environment and the experiences that we have, as Mete has alluded to in introducing us, we all have our backgrounds, then can shape how we learn to see things and how we learn to see the world. But the most important learning is how we learn to see ourselves. So that self-worth, self-value is an essential, and the essential, I would say, part of mental health. And then if we think back to that macro level of work, and in this case, creative work, there's such a high frequency of self-worth or self-value messages coming through from working through the study, really, I suppose, pursuing the field, doing any study that's done and working, and then having a structure of a company or whatever it might be, or freelancing, and then pitching these types of things, and then creating something that's acceptable. So along all of those points, there are so many potential judgments. If, for whatever reason, our self-worth hasn't evolved in a way that's sort of balanced and able to take the pros and the cons, then the impact on our neurological system can be highly stressful, and then stress can cause imbalances, and different levels of stress can cause mental illness and anxiety. And so often we think anxiety is caused by our work, but when we look back at ourselves, which is, I suppose, what I do in my work day to day, sitting down with people, discussing their situation, we can learn ways to relearn, regrow, redevelop ourselves, not to a different person, but just to a more slight change of bearing, so that we're looking at things differently and looking at how the messages we tell ourselves in response to all of these judgment-based points at which we can be like, oh, I'm not doing good enough, there's something wrong. Very often they're subconscious messages. So when we bring those to the conscious level and learn more about those, we can really empower ourselves to, when hit with these judgments or self-worth messages, we can empower ourselves to look at it a different way and work through.
Yeah, fantastic. And this goes to the creatives on the panel. That whole internal dialogue of I'm not good enough, or what I'm doing isn't great. There's that hypersensitivity that really guides what you do as a personal output, but you happen to be doing it for a professional environment. So what would you say causes the most anxiety when being creative in that kind of environment?
Thanks, Guy. I would say there are probably a few triggers for me. The first would probably be feedback, which I think any creative in the room can relate to. Just to give a bit of context, I am a freelancer and I've been working for myself for about 7 years. 3 of those 7 years have been remote. So when I get feedback, it's either in a Word document or it's on a Skype call with someone I haven't met. And maybe if it's in a Word document, it's with someone who has English as a second language. And I think we all know from experience that just even an email can be misread if you don't use enough exclamation marks, or a full stop sounds really firm. So I, for a long time, was getting really offended and like, why don't you get me? And then I've learnt just over time, really, it's just been time and experience that, hey, like, really try and understand what they're trying to say. I also really actively try and get someone to talk me through their feedback in person or on the phone. and for them to have an interaction with me that's not just on feedback beforehand. So that's one of the triggers. The other one is when a piece of my work or a project is scrapped entirely. And that is just, if it's never happened to you before, the first time is bound to make you feel like crap. And especially I think it comes back to what Daniel was saying, that if your sense of worth is really tied into that project and you haven't got some inner ground to stand on that is independent of all the stuff that's not just going on in work but your life, then you'll really feel the fall. That happened to me when I was working on an app. I was working for a health and wellbeing brand and writing on making a baby app, which is quite funny because I don't have children. And I worked on it for a year and a half. I wrote like hundreds of articles. And a year after, I remember checking how it was doing, and the company just kind of put it to the side. And I remember feeling devastated, but at the same time, it was such a good lesson for me, because it wasn't that my work was bad, it just didn't make business sense to go on with the app. And it's something I take with me all the time with feedback and projects not going on. Like, I get to practice writing as a craft, which I love, but at the end of the day, it's a business decision. And so I'm always like, business goal, target audience, business goal. And it is a form of detachment in a way, but it's also a way to be emotionally healthy for myself.
Yeah. Right. Kat, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to try to fit a creative process into like a business process, because as we were talking about before, it's a lot about that light bulb moment, and you can't get that into a process. You can't say it'll take me 5 minutes or 5 days to get you that light bulb and then produce that light bulb moment. Like, it's very hard to align a creative process to a business sort of one. And another thing on that, I think for creative people, they tie a lot of their worth, because it is seen as this ephemeral, weird, like, talent that you're just born with, which it's not true. It's seen as like something that we tie a lot to our worth, and if we can't produce that like that, it can be hard, and not being able to prove that special skill or worth whenever it's needed, or just turn it on, can be really, really rattling to your person and your identity and who you are, and if I'm valuable to this company, and if I'm only, having those light bulb moments every 7 weeks or every second sprint or every second hour, it can be quite tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of trying to fit those light bulb moments into, a designated timeline, Daniel, you mentioned that a lot of people do come to you who have that struggle, those creative people who are trying to make their way through a corporate or team structure which causes tension. Could you talk more to that?
Sure. So I guess that one of the key aspects of a corporate sort of structure is a hierarchy, and it's kind of part of our world, again, that we have a certain meaning attached to. So some people may be really comfortable, I guess, being told what to do and having a set of expectations, KPIs type of things, but many people aren't. And I would say that if you go through a sort of a conventional business pathway, it's more drilled into you that's sort of the norm. There's this hierarchical, performance-based reality and mode of operating and way of being assessed and judged, and then you sort of thrive off that. But again, the creative pathway is different, and I'm not an expert. I can't put my finger on exactly how creatives are different, but it seems to be that you creatives think you're different, and it's. I wouldn't disagree, and different is not a bad thing, as I always say. I'm
a very special person. I'm
used to being called different.
You should check out Psychologist, seriously, out there. There's a different pathway, and so then in that setting, with think about anxiety, and I've heard that it's been spoken about a lot across different areas of, I think you said, Mete, it's come up in different discussions at PauseFest, the stress and anxiety. And a key thing with that is triggers, I suppose. And we sort of talk about I was triggered or something triggered me, and I suppose there's more room in that hierarchical, output-driven, performance-driven model for triggers to happen for creative people.
It's true.
Yeah, and that is true. Like anxiety and depression is a topic that's come up in just about every PauseFest talk that I've been to. I don't. Maybe I'm going to the wrong ones, but it is such a common and prevalent topic, which makes me wonder. If people are working in team environments, what workplaces are doing right in order to help people who are struggling with mental health issues. Kat, I think we spoke briefly about we spoke briefly about what companies and teams, startup teams are doing right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are they doing right?
I can definitely talk to that, and I'm totally not biased that my manager is here. But I think putting in place EAP, so an employee assistance program, that's probably something a bigger organisation might be able to do. But I think it's a lot to do with that sense of psychological safety as well. How to cultivate that, I can't really put my finger on, but it's definitely something that can be cultivated. And I think it's about open communication. So EAP, maybe some staff in your office having taken mental health first aid, or being able to vocalise those kind of things, talking about mental health more sort of openly than we otherwise would. Like, hey, I'm having a crunchy day today. I might be working from one of the smaller offices, and just starting to normalise that kind of language and talk, and understanding that it's not the extreme cases on the ends of the spectrum, like someone's lost their mind completely and they're running around with a knife in the supermarket. It might be that someone's really struggling with triggers that they have from depression, anxiety, whatever it may be, and that day something's gone and just kind of spun them out a little bit, and they are still effective, they're still worthwhile, they can still work, but they might need slightly different circumstances for that work to feel safe and possible. So I think there's like heaps of things that EAP, making that sort of atmosphere of safety and acceptableness, that's not a thing, to talk about these things and to feel like you aren't ostracised as someone different, is definitely something. So yeah, bringing your own kind of stories to it and allowing everyone to talk about their different experiences. Because I think we'll find more often than not, everyone's had a little experience, a little taste of some mental health issues or mental illness in their family, or whether it's trauma, substance abuse. There's lots of things that happen in people's lives that impacts their emotional capacity and mental capacity day to day at work. But they're still really good workers, right?
It's something that Kat and I were talking about before, because there's a good question over in the panel about an hour ago, and it was, what would you tell your younger self? And for me, it would be, you can still feel low, you can still feel depressed, and depression is something that I've experienced through all of my 20s and something I still manage now. But you can still feel low and do great work. And I think that's why for a long time I was just trying to play catch up. And it's why I think it's important for us to be able to sit up here and talk about it. Because on paper, listening to Mete say my bio, I was like, oh yeah, I quite like her. But but on the inside, it doesn't feel like there's no big sense of accomplishment. And there are days where I really put myself down. So I think it's important that, especially also I think people who haven't experienced any mental health issues, which how lucky for them, because I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, just to know what depression or anxiety looks like, because often from the outside you would not be able to tell anything about me that I've just told you. So I think that's also really 100%. Important.
Yeah, that's something like I experienced when I was younger, like, oh, you don't have depression, I saw you laughing, and it's like, it's not really how it works, it's not really how it manifests, it doesn't necessarily look like what you think it looks like as well.
100%.
Yeah, and to what you were saying about hearing that bio and thinking, that person's pretty cool. On the flip side of that, you might hear that bio and think, oh, I'm such a tool, what a wanker. So it's just like...
Are you going to tell me something?
No, I was reading mine and I'm like, oh God, I wrote that myself, what a tool bag. But I mean, I'm amazing, obviously, as well.
I should have given myself a bigger intro.
There's flips like that where it's just like some days you can't believe it, but you got to fake it anyway.
100%, yeah. And to your point of like, that's, there's an idea of what depression looks like, what anxiety looks like, and for a long time I was in denial about that, because I've had a happy and relatively normal life, but there's still things that, if you have a working brain, you experience these emotions, and some people have it at a higher intensity than others. So it's important to identify those symptoms, however minor or major they might be, and take appropriate action.
Yeah.
And we talked about how workplaces and team environments can actually be helpful in these conversations. But what about the flip side, where there are people who are working freelance and who are working in isolation on their own from home, starting up something? What can they do to sort of keep their mental health in check and keep themselves sane? Yeah.
So from my perspective, I see it as a consultancy on yourself so businesses get a consultancy to solve specific problems. We can do that for ourselves. And again, it's about this valuing yourself, but sometimes we have to take the step and just force it, sort of like you said, just do it.
Yeah.
And then maybe the benefit can come later. Sort of that fake it till you make it type of situation. There are a lot of people out there who are just like myself, whose profession and I suppose vocation is to hear people out and give some other perspectives and to some sort of different ways to look at things. And it does happen. There's certainly, I see all kinds of people, all kinds of professionals, but certainly plenty of freelancing creatives, a really good number, a large number. And coming into space there, it's very empowering just to put things out there and get some perspective on the structures and the patterns in the work, the uncertainties in the work. Sometimes people, when looking at it and really thinking about it, they decide to go into a larger organisation, or to change the way they freelance, or to work together with other freelancers, or whatever it might be. So because we're all different, as I think everyone's sort of really acknowledging so much, we have to sometimes tailor the strategy to ourselves and get some support on bouncing ideas. I think that's a really good way to do it. And then there are simple, practical strategies of self-care, which is keeping active, keeping moving, breaking up the day, doing things one enjoys, and linking and connecting with anyone who you can, your friends, your family, these types of things. Because a key thing with our brain and our humanness is that we are wired socially, and so the isolation of freelancing is a real thing, right? Where every part of our brain has a different sort of function, but the wiring within our brain is all designed to keep us together. I mean, we're all here together. We're up on the panel together. We work as humans. We work together. So it is a real strain on our system. And another thing is that the strain and stress is cumulative. And so those types of real strong impacts of mental health, they're not just one thing. Usually it's like a build-up. So, it's ideal that we get onto that early.
Yeah, especially before that burnout kind of hits. And
Absolutely.
We're definitely sort of in that culture of like working until we hit burnout, and somehow that's become our measure of success. You're like, I worked until I couldn't work anymore. I was up until 5 a.m. I did an all-nighter on this thing. There's that sort of damaging dialogue of like success and health, and I think that might relate back to the sense of self-worth.